The air in the Metropolitan Trust Bank crackled with tension, as if someone had just dropped a glass and everyone was waiting for the shards to settle. It was a sweltering July afternoon in 2025, and the sleek, glass-walled branch in downtown New York buzzed with the hum of transactions, the soft clicks of keyboards, and the occasional chime of a notification from the bank's AI-driven fraud detection system. But the question that sliced through the noise like a blade came from Rachel Thompson, a teller with a pinched expression and a voice sharp enough to cut. "Where on God's green earth did you get this kind of cash?" The man standing before her, Ethan Carter, didn't flinch. His dark eyes met hers with a calm that seemed to unsettle her even more. He was 35, dressed in black jeans, a plain gray t-shirt, and a lightweight jacket, hardly the uniform of the corporate elite who frequented this bank's business section. In his hand was a thick stack of bills, crisp and neatly banded, alongside a check that would soon turn Rachel's world upside down. But let's rewind, because this moment, this single, shattering question, was the spark that ignited a story no one in that bank could have predicted. Ethan Carter had walked into the Metropolitan Trust Bank at precisely 2:17 p.m., his sneakers silent against the polished marble floor. The bank was a monument to wealth, its towering ceilings and digital screens flashing stock tickers a stark contrast to the gritty streets of Manhattan outside. New York in 2025 was a city on edge. Inflation had driven up the cost of everything, from coffee to rent, and the headlines on X were ablaze with debates over a recent police incident that had reignited protests against racial injustice. The platform, a chaotic stew of opinions, amplified every grievance, and Ethan, scrolling through it on his phone that morning, had seen the hashtag justice now trending alongside vitriolic threads blaming certain groups for rising crime. He'd shaken his head and pocketed his phone. Used to the noise, but never immune to it, Ethan was no stranger to being underestimated. As the CEO of Carter FinTech, a rising star in the financial tech world, he built a company that used artificial intelligence to provide loans and investment tools to communities. Traditional banks often overlooked communities like the one he'd grown up in, where dreams were big, but bank accounts were small. His company had just closed a $10 million deal with a venture capital firm, and the cash and check in his bag were the fruits of that labor. He'd chosen to dress down today, partly because he liked the freedom of it, partly because he knew it kept people guessing. And in a city where appearances were everything, Ethan Carter was a man who didn't need to prove himself with a suit. He approached the business account desk, nodding politely to the teller. Rachel Thompson, 42, with neatly pinned blonde hair and a navy blazer that screamed, "I follow the rules," looked up from her monitor. Her eyes scanned him from head to toe, lingering on his casual attire, and her lips pressed into a thin line. Before Ethan could even speak, she raised a hand, her voice clipped. "Excuse me, sir, this is for business clientele only. The regular line is over there." She pointed to a crowded queue near the entrance, where a mix of customers tapped their feet impatiently. Ethan's smile didn't waver. "I'm in the right place," he said, his tone even but firm. "I just left my office. I need to make a deposit." He set his leather messenger bag on the counter, unzipped it, and pulled out the stack of cash, placing it in front of Rachel with the same care one might use to handle a fragile heirloom. Her eyes widened, then narrowed, as if the sight of so much money in his hands was an affront to the natural order. That's when she fired her question. "Where on God's green earth did you get this kind of cash?" The words hung in the air, heavy with accusation. A few heads turned, customers in line, a young woman checking her phone, an older man signing a form at a nearby desk. Ethan leaned forward slightly, his voice steady. "From my business," he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Rachel wasn't buying it. She crossed her arms, her badge glinting under the fluorescent lights. "Look, Before we go any further, I need to see some ID. Her tone was sharp, her eyes darting to the stack of bills, as if they might vanish if she blinked. Ethan raised an eyebrow but reached into his wallet without a word, sliding his driver's license across the counter. Rachel snatched it up, her frown deepening as she studied it. "Ethan Carter," she muttered, then looked up at him. "Is this really you?" Ethan met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "Yes, it's really me." She stared for a moment longer, then pushed further. "I'm going to need another form of ID." Her voice was flat, but there was a challenge in it, a dare for him to push back. Ethan's brow furrowed slightly, the first hint of irritation breaking through his calm. "What for?" "This is the first time I've ever been asked for a second ID at this bank." Rachel leaned back in her chair, her lips curling into a smirk. "Well, according to bank policy, I have the right to ask if I suspect any suspicious activity." The way she said suspicious was a jab, and it landed. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he kept his composure. Around them, the bank's hum seemed to quiet, as if the room itself were holding its breath. A young man, in a hoodie, waiting in the regular line, glanced over, his phone already in hand. Sensing something worth recording, "Have you ever been treated like a criminal just because of how you looked?" What would you do if you were standing in Ethan's shoes, facing a wall of doubt built on nothing but prejudice? If you believe no one should be judged by their appearance, hit that like button and subscribe to Legacy Stories, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Ethan didn't argue. Instead, he reached into his bag again, his movements deliberate. "You know what? Fine. Here's my MIT ID." He slid a worn but pristine card across the counter, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology logo gleaming under the light. Rachel's eyes flicked to it, and her smirk faltered, replaced by a squint of disbelief. "MIT?" she said, her voice dripping with skepticism. "You honestly expect me to believe you went to MIT? This looks like something you printed it." Ethan's patience was wearing thin, but his voice remained calm. "Why would I carry a fake ID to a bank? Call the registrar's office if you don't believe me." Rachel's face twisted, as if he'd just insulted her intelligence. She opened her mouth to retort, but before she could, a notification pinged on her computer. The bank's AI system, designed to flag large transactions, had processed Ethan's deposit and returned a green checkmark. No issues detected. Rachel glanced at the screen, then back at Ethan, her expression hardening. She wasn't about to let a machine tell her she was wrong. Outside, the city pulsed with life-honking taxis, scrolling billboards, and the ever-present chatter of X, where posts about banking while black were already gaining traction. Inside, the tension at Rachel's desk was a microcosm of a larger struggle, one that Ethan had faced before and would face again. But he wasn't here to fight. He was here to do business. And as Rachel reached for the phone to call for backup, the stage was set for a confrontation that would expose more than just her prejudice. It would reveal the power of truth in the face of doubt. The fluorescent lights of the Metropolitan Trust Bank buzzed faintly, casting a sterile glow over the marble counters and the growing tension at Rachel Thompson's desk. Ethan Carter stood calmly, his MIT ID still lying on the counter like an unanswered challenge, while Rachel's eyes darted between the card and the stack of cash in front of her. The green checkmark on her computer screen confirmation from the banks. The AI fraud detection system that Ethan's deposit was clean-seamed. To mock her. But Rachel wasn't one to back down, not when her instincts, honed by years of scanning customers and amplified by the endless X posts about financial scams, told her something was off. She leaned forward, her voice low but laced with accusation. "This ID doesn't prove anything. I need something more official. A passport, maybe?" Ethan's jaw tightened, but his tone remained even, almost disarmingly polite. A passport? For a deposit? I've been banking here for years, and no one's ever asked me to carry a passport. He gestured to the bustling business section, where a white man in a tailored suit had just breezed through a transaction without so much as showing his driver's license. Did you ask him for a passport? Rachel's cheeks flushed, but she doubled down, her voice rising just enough to draw attention from nearby customers. Bank policy gives me the right to verify identity if I suspect suspicious activity. And this, she waved a hand at the cash, looks suspicious to me. The word suspicious landed like a slap, and Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly, though he still didn't raise his voice. Around them, the bank's hum faltered. A young woman in a yellow sundress, waiting in the regular line, glanced up. From her phone, her fingers hovering over the screen as if deciding whether to hit record. An older man at a nearby desk muttered something to his companion, his gaze flicking toward Ethan. Have you ever felt the weight of someone's judgment, like they've already decided who you are before you've said a word? What would you do if you were Ethan, standing there with the truth on your side, but facing a wall of doubt? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you believe no one should be judged by their appearance, hit that like button and subscribe to Legacy Stories. Ethan took a slow breath, his hands resting lightly on the counter. Suspicious activity, he repeated, his voice calm but carrying an edge now. You're looking at a stack of cash and an ID from MIT, and you're telling me that's not enough? What exactly is suspicious here? He tilted his head, his gaze steady, challenging her to say what she was really thinking. Rachel's lips pursed, and for a moment she seemed to hesitate. The AI system's approval blinked on her screen, a silent rebuke to her accusations, but she ignored it. In her mind, the pieces didn't add up. Ethan's casual clothes, the sheer volume of cash, the audacity of claiming an MIT education. It didn't fit the profile of the business clients she was used to, the ones who wore Armani and carried briefcases embossed with corporate logos. She'd seen too many X threads warning about money laundering and fraud rings, often laced with coded language that she'd internalized without questioning. I'm just doing my job, she snapped, her voice loud enough to make a nearby teller, Emily Brooks, glance over. If you can't provide proper ID, I can't process this. Ethan raised an eyebrow, his patience fraying but still intact. Proper ID? I've given you 2 forms of identification, and your system says the deposit is fine. What more do you need? He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a measured tone. Or is this about something else? The implication hung in the air, unspoken but unmistakable. Rachel's eyes flashed with indignation, and she stood up straighter, her badge glinting under the lights. Don't you dare make this about something it's not, she said, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and defensiveness. I know a problem when I see one. She reached for the phone on her desk, her fingers hovering over the buttons. Emily, she called out, her voice carrying across the floor. Can you come here for a second? Emily Brooks, a younger teller with dark hair pulled into a neat ponytail, approached cautiously, sensing the tension. She glanced at Ethan, then at Rachel, her expression neutral but curious. What's going on? She asked, her eyes flicking to the MIT ID on the counter. Rachel held up the card, her smirk returning. Does this look real to you? He says he went to MIT, but I'm not buying it. And this cash? No way this is legit. She gestured to the stack of bills, her tone dripping with skepticism. Emily leaned in, examining the ID closely. Her brow furrowed, then relaxed as she recognized the holographic seal and the familiar layout of an MIT card. Yeah, this looks real, she said, her voice soft but certain. I've seen these before. My cousin went to MIT. Rachel's smirk vanished, replaced by a scowl. You're kidding me, she muttered, snatching the ID back. Fine. Maybe the ID's real, but that doesn't explain the money. She turned back to Ethan, her voice rising again. "What kind of business are you running that gives you this kind of cash?" "Because I'm not processing this until I know it's clean." Ethan's calm facade cracked just enough for a flicker of frustration to show. "I told you, it's from my business, Carter FinTech. You can look it up, or better yet, check your own system. It's already cleared the deposit." He pointed to her computer screen, where the green checkmark still glowed. Rachel glanced at it, her jaw tightening, but she refused to acknowledge the IS verdict. In her mind, technology could be wrong, but her gut wasn't. And her gut was screaming that Ethan Carter was troubled. By now, the scene was drawing a crowd. The young woman in the yellow sundress had started recording, her phone angled discreetly to capture the exchange. She tapped furiously on her screen, posting the video to X with the caption, "This teller's giving this guy a hard time for no reason. #BankingWhileBlack." Within minutes, the post began to gain traction, retweets and comments piling up from users across the country. "Typical," one user wrote. "Banks always profiling." Another countered, "She's just doing her job." You don't know the whole story. The divide was clear, a microcosm of the polarized debates that dominated X in 2025. Where every incident became a battleground. Back in the bank, Ethan sensed the growing attention but kept his focus on Rachel. "If you're not going to process my deposit, I'd like to speak to your manager," he said, his voice firm but still devoid of anger. "This is getting ridiculous." Rachel's eyes widened as if he'd just crossed a line. "Oh, you want to be a smart guy?" she snapped, her hand finally pressing a button under the counter. "Security!" she called out, her voice loud enough to make heads turn across the entire bank. The young woman's phone stayed steady, capturing every word, every gesture. Customers whispered to each other, some shaking their heads, others nodding in approval of Rachel's assertiveness. The older man at the nearby desk muttered, "About time someone took control." Ethan stood his ground, his expression unreadable, but his posture radiating confidence. He'd been here before, not in this bank, not with this teller, but in moments where the world looked at him and saw only what it wanted to see. He knew the script, but he also knew how to rewrite it. As the sound of heavy footsteps approached, signaling the arrival of security, Ethan reached into his bag again, pulling out a check that would change everything. "While you're at it," he said, sliding it across the counter, "I'd like to deposit this too?" Rachel glanced at the check, and her face froze. The amount, $20,000, stared back at her, printed in bold across a document bearing the logo of Carter FinTech. Her voice rose, incredulous. $20,000? Seriously? What are you doing with this kind of money? She picked up the check, her hands trembling slightly, and read the name at the top. "Carter FinTech," she muttered, then looked up at Ethan, her eyes narrowing to slits. "You actually expect me to believe you're connected to this company? This is fraudulent, isn't it?" Ethan met her gaze, his voice steady as steel. "Call the number on the check. Confirm it yourself." He leaned back slightly, folding his arms as if daring her to take the next step. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for Rachel's move. The young woman's video was now live on X, racking up views by the second, and the hashtag banking while black was climbing the trending list. Have you ever had someone try to tear you down just because they couldn't imagine your success? If you believe everyone deserves a fair shot, like this video and subscribe to Legacy Stories for more stories that expose prejudice and celebrate truth. The air in the Metropolitan Trust Bank thickened, as if the weight of Rachel Thompson's accusations had sucked the oxygen from the room. Ethan Carter stood at her counter, his $20,000 check from Carter FinTech lying between them like a gauntlet thrown down. Rachel's hand hovered over the phone, her fingers still on the security button she'd pressed moments ago, her eyes locked on Ethan with a mix of defiance and disbelief. The stack of cash and his may sat ignored, overshadowed by the check. That had just upended her assumptions. "You actually expect me to believe you're connected to this company?" she repeated, her voice rising, sharp enough to cut through the murmurs of the growing crowd. "This is fraudulent, isn't it?" Ethan's expression remained calm, but there was a steel in his gaze now, a quiet intensity that made Rachel shift uncomfortably. "Call the number on the check," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "Confirm it yourself." He folded his arms, leaning back slightly, as if giving her the space to dig her own grave. The young woman in the yellow sundress, still filming. From the regular line, zoomed in on the exchange. Her video now racking up thousands of views on X with the hashtag #BankingWhileBlack. Comments flooded in. "This teller's out of line." And "Why is she assuming he's a criminal?" Others, predictably, took Rachel's side. "She's just protecting the bank. Cash like that is sketchy." In 2025, X was a battlefield of opinions, and this moment was fuel for the fire. Rachel's lips curled into a smirk. As if Ethan's challenge was a bluff, she was eager to call. "Oh, I will," she snapped, snatching the check and punching the number into her phone with exaggerated precision. The bank's hum seemed to fade, replaced by the soft ringing of the call on speaker. Customers craned their necks, drawn to the drama unfolding at the business desk. Emily Brooks, the younger teller who'd confirmed the MIT ID's authenticity, lingered nearby, her eyes darting between Rachel and Ethan, sensing the storm about to break. Have you ever stood your ground when someone tried to tear you down, knowing the truth was on your side? What would you do if you were Ethan, facing a wall of prejudice with nothing but facts to fight back? Share your story in the comments, and if you believe success knows no color or clothing, hit that like button and subscribe to Legacy Stories for more tales of truth triumphing over doubt. The call connected, and a professional voice answered. "Carter Fintech, how may I assist you?" Rachel straightened, her tone dripping with authority. "This is Rachel Thompson from Metropolitan Trust Bank. I have an individual here attempting to deposit a check that appears fraudulent. Could you connect me to the owner, please?" She shot Ethan a triumphant glance, as if she'd already won. But before the voice on the other end could respond, a loud ring cut through the silence. Ethan's phone, vibrating in his pocket. He pulled it out slowly, almost theatrically, and held it up for Rachel to see. The screen displayed an incoming call from the very number she'd dialed. He swiped to answer, his voice calm but carrying a weight that silenced the room. "You see," he said, holding the phone to his ear, "you're calling me." The words landed like a thunderclap. Rachel froze, her hand clutching the receiver, her eyes bouncing between her phone and Ethan's. The smirk vanished, replaced by a flicker of panic. I don't understand," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan lowered his phone, ending the call, and leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. "Let me make it clear for you. I'm Ethan Carter, CEO of Carter Fintech. That check is from my company. The cash is from a deal we closed this morning. And if you checked your own system," he nodded toward her computer, where the IS green checkmark still glowed, "you'd know this is all legitimate." He paused, letting the words sink in. "The question isn't where I got this money. The question is why you assumed I couldn't have it." The bank fell silent, save for the faint buzz of the lights and the soft clicks of the young woman's phone, still recording. Her video was now trending on X with thousands of retweets and a flood of emojis, angry faces, raised fists, and clapping hands. The hashtag #BankingWhileBlack had climbed to the top 10, and news outlets were starting to pick up the story, their notifications pinging in the background. A middle-aged woman in a business suit, waiting at a nearby desk, whispered to her colleague, Did he just say he's the CEO? The older man who'd muttered earlier now looked uncomfortable, his eyes fixed on the floor. Rachel's face flushed crimson, her hands trembling as she set the phone down. "You're the CEO?" she said, her voice cracking. That's not possible." She fumbled for words, her mind racing to reconcile the man in jeans and a t-shirt with the idea of a fintech mogul. Carter Fintech was a name she'd heard in passing, a disruptive startup challenging banks like hers, offering loans to communities the industry had long ignored. But she'd never imagined its leader would look like Ethan. Before she could say more, heavy footsteps echoed across the marble floor. Marcus Johnson, security guard, appeared, his tall frame filling the space. Marcus, a black man in his late 40s, with a shaved head and a no-nonsense demeanor, had seen his share of conflicts in his decade at the bank. He'd also felt the sting of prejudice himself, both on and off the job, and his instincts told him this was more than a routine. "Call. Everything okay here?" he asked, his voice professional but tinged with caution as he glanced between Rachel and Ethan. Rachel seized the moment, pointing at Ethan with a dramatic flourish. "No, it's not okay. This man handed me a fake ID, lied about where he works, and now he's trying to deposit a fraudulent check." Her voice was loud, almost theatrical, drawing gasps from a few customers. The young woman's camera stayed steady, capturing every word. Ethan didn't flinch, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp. "She's profiling me," he said, his tone even but firm. "I'm trying to make a legitimate deposit, and she's making assumptions based on nothing but how I look." Marcus raised an eyebrow, his gaze shifting to Rachel. He'd heard accusations like this before, and he knew the playbook. Sometimes it was about security. Sometimes it was about something uglier. "Maybe you should verify the check," he suggested, his voice neutral but pointed. "Call the company again. Make sure." He nodded toward the check, his expression unreadable, but his words carrying a subtle challenge. Rachel hesitated, her confidence wavering. She glanced at the check, then at Ethan, who stood with the same quiet assurance he'd carried from the start. "Fine," she muttered, picking up the phone again. But before she could dial, Ethan spoke, his voice cutting through the tension. "I already told you, you're calling me. But if you need more proof, check your client records. Carter Fintech's been with this bank for 3 years. I'm sure my name's in there." Rachel's hand paused, her fingers hovering over the keypad. The AI system on her screen blinked, its data confirming Ethan's account as a priority. Client, but she refused to look at it. Her pride, her fear, her years of internalized biases, they all screamed louder than the facts. "You people always have an excuse," she snapped, her voice loud enough to make Emily wince. "I know. A crook when I see one." The room went still. The phrase, "you people," hung in the air, a verbal grenade that exploded in the silence. Ethan's eyes locked onto hers, and for the first time, a flicker of anger crossed his face. "Everything you just said couldn't be further from the truth," he said, his voice low but resonant. "You assumed I didn't go to college, but I graduated top of my class at MIT. You assumed I don't have a real job, but I built Carter Fintech from the ground up, and it's one of the fastest growing companies in this city. The point is, you don't know me, and you never will if you keep judging books by their covers." Rachel stared, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Then, as if clinging to her last shred of control, she laughed, a harsh, mocking sound that echoed across the bank. "You expect us to believe that?" she said, turning to Marcus. "Get him out of here. He's a liar." But Marcus didn't move. Instead, he crossed his arms, his gaze steady. "What if he's telling the truth?" he said quietly. "Maybe you should check the records like he said, just to be sure." The standoff was electric, every eye in the bank on the trio at the counter. The young woman's video was now live streaming, with comments pouring in. "This guy's a boss," and "Fire that teller." The ex-post had reached newsrooms, and a local reporter was already on their way, sensing a story that could dominate. The cycle. Have you ever seen someone's world crumble because of their own ignorance? If you believe in standing up to prejudice, like this video and subscribe to Legacy Stories for more stories where truth wins. The Metropolitan Trust Bank was a pressure cooker, the tension at Rachel Thompson's desk boiling over as Ethan Carter stood firm, his revelation as CEO of Carter FinTech still reverberating. Rachel's mocking laugh had faded into a stunned silence, her hand clutching the phone she'd used to call Ethan's own company, her face a mask of disbelief and rising panic. Marcus Johnson, the security guard, stood nearby, his arms crossed, his suggestion to check the bank's records hanging in the air like a challenge Rachel couldn't ignore. The young woman in the yellow sundress, her phone still recording, had turned the confrontation into a viral moment on X, with hashtag banking while black now trending nationwide. Thousands of comments poured in, some cheering Ethan's calm defiance, others defending Rachel's caution. In the polarized world of 2025, where every incident was a spark for debate, the bank was no longer just a place of business. It was a stage. Rachel's eyes darted to her computer screen, where the AI fraud detection system's green checkmark mocked her accusations. Ethan's $20,000 check and stack of cash sat on the counter, undeniable proof of his legitimacy, yet she clung to her skepticism like a lifeline. "This doesn't prove anything," she muttered, her voice trembling but defiant. "Anyone can print a check. I'm not processing this until I know it's real." She turned to Marcus, her tone sharp. "Do your job and escort him out. He's wasting everyone's time." Marcus didn't budge. His years as a security guard had taught him to read situations, and he'd seen enough to know this wasn't about fraud. It was about something uglier. "I think you should check the client records," he said again, his voice steady but firm. "If he's telling the truth, you're making a big mistake." His words carried a weight that made Rachel flinch, but before she could respond, a new voice cut through the tension. "Rachel, what's going on here?" Daniel Harris, the branch manager, strode into the scene, his blue suit crisp, but his expression tight with concern. At 48, Daniel was a seasoned professional, navigating the cutthroat world of banking where customer retention was everything. The Metropolitan Trust Bank had faced scrutiny before a 2024 lawsuit over discriminatory lending practices had left a stain, and Daniel was under pressure to keep the branch's reputation spotless. He'd been alerted by a frantic message from Emily Brooks, who'd slipped away to warn him about the escalating situation. His eyes scanned the room. Ethan, calm but resolute. Rachel, flustered and defensive. Marcus, standing like a sentinel. And a growing crowd of customers, some whispering, others filming. Ethan turned to Daniel, his posture relaxed but his gaze direct. "Good to see you, Daniel," he said, his voice carrying a familiarity that made Rachel's head snap up. Daniel's face softened briefly, a flicker of recognition passing between them. "Mr. Carter," he said, nodding. "What's the problem here?" His tone was professional, but there was an edge of urgency, as if he sensed the storm brewing both inside the bank and on the X platform outside. Rachel jumped in before Ethan could speak, her words tumbling out in a rush. "This man came in with a huge amount of cash and a suspicious check. I asked for ID, followed protocol, and he got defensive. I think the check's fraudulent, and his story doesn't add up." She gestured to the counter, where Ethan's MIT ID, driver's license, and check lay in a neat row. Her voice was loud, drawing more eyes, including those of the young woman whose live-streamed video was now pushing 50,000 views on X, with news outlets retweeting it as bank teller accuses black CEO of fraud. Daniel's brow furrowed as he looked at Ethan. "Is that true, Mr. Carter?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Ethan shook his head, his voice calm but cutting. "No, Daniel. I came to deposit funds from my company, Carter FinTech." "Your system cleared the transaction," he pointed to Rachel's screen, where the green checkmark glowed. "But your teller decided I'm a criminal based on how I look. She's ignored your AI, demanded extra IDs, and now she's calling security instead of doing her job." Rachel's face flushed crimson, her hands clenching into fists. "That's not true," she snapped. "I'm protecting the bank." He could be anyone, but Daniel raised a hand, silencing her. He stepped to the counter, his eyes scanning the check and IDs. Then he turned to Rachel's computer, where the AI system's data confirmed Ethan as a priority client, with Carter FinTech listed as one of the branch's top accounts. Daniel's jaw tightened, his voice low but sharp. "Rachel, did you check the client records?" She hesitated, her defiance crumbling under his scrutiny. I was about to," she stammered, but the lie was obvious. Daniel's expression hardened. "You didn't, and you ignored the system's clearance." He turned to Ethan, his tone shifting to one of sincere apology. "Mr. Carter, I'm deeply sorry for this. Let's take this to my office, and I'll handle your deposit personally." But Rachel wasn't done. "Wait a minute," she protested, her voice rising to a pitch that made customers gasp. "You're taking his side? Just look at him. Can you blame me for being cautious?" The words spilled out before she could stop them, and the room froze. Marcus's eyes narrowed, and Emily, still lingering nearby, covered her mouth in shock. The young woman's phone captured it all, the X comments exploding. Did she just say that? And "this bank's done." The hashtag banking while black was now trending globally, with activists and influencers weighing in, some calling for a boycott of Metropolitan Trust. Daniel's face darkened, his voice like steel. "Rachel, that's enough. You've crossed the line." He turned to Marcus. "Please escort Miss Thompson to the back office. She's temporarily suspended pending an investigation." Rachel's mouth dropped open, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Suspended? You can't be serious. I was just doing my job." But Daniel's expression was unyielding. "You did more than that, and you know it. We've had complaints about you before, similar incidents, similar assumptions. This stops now." Marcus stepped forward, his demeanor professional but empathetic. "Let's go, Miss Thompson," he said, gesturing toward the back. Rachel stood frozen, her hands trembling as she gathered her badge and personal items. The crowd watched in silence, some nodding in approval, others whispering in discomfort. The older man who'd earlier supported Rachel now avoided eye contact, while the young woman's video continued to stream, its view count climbing into the hundreds of thousands. Daniel turned back to Ethan, his voice heavy with sincerity. "Mr. Carter, I can't apologize enough. Please, let's step into my office to sort this out." Ethan nodded, his expression composed but his eyes betraying a mix of exhaustion and resolve. "I appreciate that, Daniel," he said, gathering his IDs in check. "But this isn't just about me. It's about how people like me are treated every day." As Ethan followed Daniel toward the private office, the bank buzzed with whispers. The young woman's video had caught the attention of a local news crew, now parked outside, their cameras ready to capture the fallout. On X, the story was at Tory. Firestorm, with users sharing their own experiences of being profiled in banks, stores, and workplaces. "This is why we need change," one post read, retweeted by a prominent civil rights group. Another user wrote, "She thought she could humiliate him, but he flipped the script." The divide was stark, but the truth was undeniable. Ethan Carter had walked in to make a deposit and walked out as a symbol of resilience. Have you ever witnessed someone try to tear another person down, only to be exposed by their own ignorance? If you believe respect shouldn't depend on appearance, like this video and subscribe to Legacy Stories for more stories that reveal the power of truth over prejudice. The Metropolitan Trust Bank was quiet now, the storm of confrontation replaced by an uneasy calm as Ethan Carter followed Daniel Harris to his private office, leaving Rachel Thompson to gather her belongings under Marcus Johnson's watchful eye. The marble floors still gleamed, but the air felt heavier, charged with the weight of what had just unfolded. Rachel's suspension had sent a ripple through the bank, and outside, the world was watching. The young woman's video, tagged #BankingWhileBlack, had exploded on X, amassing over 1 million views in under an hour. News vans lined the street, their cameras trained on the bank's glass facade, while X users debated furiously, "This is systemic racism." One post declared, retweeted by activists, "She was just following protocol," countered another, sparking a thread that stretched into the thousands. In 2025, every incident was a flashpoint, and Ethan Carter had just become the center of 1. Rachel stood in the back office, her hand shaking as she stuffed her badge and personal items into a purse. Marcus, stationed by the door, kept his expression neutral, but his eyes held a quiet empathy. He'd seen this before, people undone by their own biases, their worlds collapsing under the weight of truth. "You don't understand," Rachel muttered, more to herself than to him. "I was protecting the bank. I've seen the stories on X scams, fraud, people like him." Her voice trailed off, the words sounding hollow even to her. Marcus didn't respond, but his silence was answer enough. Rachel's suspension wasn't. The end. An internal investigation was underway, and the bank's history of complaints against her 3 in the past year, all involving minority customers, made her fate almost certain. In Daniel's office, Ethan sat across from the manager, the $20,000 check and stack of cash now processed without issue. Daniel leaned forward, his face etched with regret. "Mr. Carter, I can't apologize enough," he said, his voice heavy. "This should never have happened. We'll make this right, whatever you need. Name it." Ethan's gaze was steady, but there was a weariness in his eyes, the kind that came from fighting battles most people never saw. "I don't want compensation, Daniel," he said. "I want change. Your bank needs to do better training, policies, something to stop this from happening to the next person who doesn't look the part." Daniel nodded, scribbling notes. "We're launching a diversity training program next month, but I'll push to expedite it. And I'd like to personally oversee a review of our customer service protocols." Ethan leaned back, considering the offer. He knew words were cheap, especially from a bank still stinging from a 2024 discrimination lawsuit. But he also knew public pressure, the kind now building on X, could force real action. "I'll hold you to that," he said, his tone firm but not unkind. "And I want Carter FinTech to partner with you on it. My company's built on giving people a fair shot. Maybe it's time your bank learned how." Outside, the X firestorm raged on. The viral video had drawn statements from civil rights groups, with one prominent organization calling for a federal investigation into the bank's practices. A local news anchor, reporting live from the sidewalk, framed the incident as a stark reminder of racial bias in everyday spaces. Ethan, unaware of the full extent of the online uproar, stepped out of Daniel's office to find his phone buzzing with notifications. His assistant had forwarded a flood of messages, reporters requesting interviews, activists offering support, and ordinary people sharing their own stories of being profiled. One message from a young black entrepreneur read, "You showed them who you are. Thank you." Ethan paused in the bank's lobby, scrolling through X. The hashtag banking while black was now a global phenomenon, with users from London to Lagos sharing parallel experiences. He tapped out a quick post. Today, I was judged for how I looked, not who I am. Let's build a world where that doesn't happen. Hashtag banking while black. Within minutes, it had thousands of retweets, amplifying his voice far beyond the bank's walls. But Ethan wasn't here for fame. Carter FinTech's mission, to break financial barriers for marginalized communities, was his fight. And this incident only sharpened his resolve. Back in the bank, the investigation into Rachel's conduct moved swiftly. By the next day, her termination was confirmed. The decision announced in a carefully worded press release from Metropolitan Trust. We are committed to fostering an inclusive environment. It read, promising new training and stricter oversight. Rachel, now jobless, faced a barrage of online criticism, her name trending alongside the bank's. Some ex-users vilified her. Others pitied her, arguing she was a product of a flawed system. Rachel herself sat at home, scrolling through the comments, her anger giving way to a nagging doubt. The economic pressures of 2025 rising rents, stagnant wages had fueled her stress, but she couldn't deny the truth. She'd let bias cloud her judgment, and it had cost her everything. Ethan, meanwhile, turned down interview requests, choosing instead to speak at a community forum on financial equity, where he shared his story to a packed room. This isn't about one teller or one bank, he told the crowd. It's about a system that assumes some of us don't belong. We change that by proving them wrong every day. His words, live streamed on X, inspired a new wave of support, with Carter FinTech's user base growing as people sought alternatives to traditional banks. Have you ever faced a moment where standing up for yourself changed how others saw you? If you believe in fighting for fairness, like this video and subscribe to Legacy Stories for more stories that show what happens when truth meets prejudice. The bank, under pressure, partnered with Carter FinTech to launch a pilot program training staff on bias and equity, a move praised by some and dismissed by others as damage control. Ethan saw it as a start, not a solution. He knew the real work lay ahead, not just in banks, but in a society still grappling with the divides X so vividly exposed. As he left the forum, a young woman approached him, clutching a phone. I was the one who filmed it, she said, her voice trembling. I'm sorry you went through that. Ethan smiled, his exhaustion giving way to gratitude. Don't be sorry, he said. You helped tell the truth. The sun dipped below the Manhattan skyline, casting a warm glow over the glass facade of the Metropolitan Trust Bank as Ethan Carter stepped onto the sidewalk, his messenger bag slung over his shoulder. The news vans had dispersed, but the echoes of the day's events lingered, amplified by the relentless churn of X, where hashtag banking while black still trended, now with millions of views. Ethan's phone buzzed with notifications messages of support, speaking invitations, and a flood of new followers inspired by his stand. But as he walked toward the subway, his thoughts weren't on the spotlight. They were on the countless others who faced what he had without a title or viral video to turn the tables. In 2025, America was a nation of progress and paradoxes, where technology like Carter FinTech's I promised equity, but human biases still built walls. Inside the bank, the air had settled, but the impact of Ethan's confrontation with Rachel Thompson rippled on. Rachel, now unemployed, sat in her small Brooklyn apartment, scrolling through X posts that branded her a villain. Some called for her to be canceled. Others, a smaller but vocal group, argued she was a scapegoat for a system that bred suspicion. The economic pressures of 2025 skyrocketing rents, stagnant wages had fueled her stress. But as she read Ethan's X post about building a world without judgment, a seed of doubt took root. She wasn't ready to admit her fault, not yet. But the sting of her actions lingered, a quiet invitation to change. The story left her future open, a reminder that even those who stumble can learn. Given time and reflection. Ethan, meanwhile, stood taller, not because of the victory, but because of the purpose it reinforced. At the community forum a week later, he spoke to a diverse crowd, his voice steady but passionate. "I didn't walk into that bank to prove a point," he said, his words live-streamed to thousands on X. "I walked in to do business." But when someone tries to define you by their prejudices, you don't just fight for yourself. You fight for everyone who's been underestimated. The crowd erupted in applause, and Carter FinTech's user base surged as people saw in Ethan a leader who turned pain into progress. The bank, under Daniel Harris's leadership, rolled out its promised diversity training, partnering with Carter FinTech to develop AI tools that flagged biased interactions. It was a small step, but Ethan knew change started small. He saw the bank's efforts not as a win, but as a challenge to keep pushing. On X, the conversation evolved, with users sharing stories of resilience under hashtags like #BreakTheBias. The young woman who'd filmed the incident, now a local activist, launched a campaign to train small businesses on equity, inspired by Ethan's example. The humanistic lesson of this story lies in its call to see beyond appearances. Ethan's calm defiance showed that strength isn't in anger, but in truth, wielded with purpose. Rachel's downfall wasn't just punishment, it was a mirror to society, reflecting how fear and bias can blind us to others' worth. Yet her story also holds hope. Even those who err can grow if they choose to listen. The bank's response, imperfect but earnest, reminds us that systems can change when pushed by those who demand better. And the young woman's video, a spark that lit a movement, proves that one voice can amplify 1,000 others. This story isn't just about Ethan or Rachel. It's about all of us, and the choices we make when faced with difference. As Ethan boarded the subway, his reflection in the window showed a man unchanged by the day's chaos, but sharpened by it. He wasn't a hero, just someone who refused to be less than he was. The world would keep judging by clothes, by skin, by assumptions, but Ethan knew the truth was a stronger weapon than any prejudice. He opened X one last time, reading a comment from a teenager. "You made me believe I can be more than they think." He smiled, pocketing his phone, ready for the work ahead. Have you ever seen someone rise above judgment to inspire change? If you believe in a world where everyone gets a fair shot, like this video and subscribe to Legacy Stories for more tales that celebrate resilience and expose truth. Share your story in the comments. What's one moment when you proved them wrong? Join us at Legacy Stories, where every narrative reminds us that no one's worth is defined by their cover.